All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the July meeting of the Accelerating Innovation Standing Committee for the Cool Council. Nice to see everybody. Hope everybody's having a good summer, staying cool in this crazy heat, although it's a little bit nicer today. We've got several things on our agenda today. We've got some visitors from KDE specifically to share about some of the platforms that we're going to be using. Kathy's going to be giving us some cross committee updates, and then the majority of this time we are going to be spending in some actual breakout room working groups. Because we know several of you have been out of town, you've been on vacation, it's summertime, everybody's kind of going every which direction. And so we thought it would be the best use of our time to just spend this afternoon going through some of the different systems that we're looking at, depending on which one you signed up for at our previous meeting. So first up, we've got Susan Strange from KDE to talk about Slack and cross-committee collaboration.
Hello, everybody. First off, thank you all for having me at your committee meeting. So I am going to share my screen so I can show you some things on it. But essentially, Slack is a program that we're going to use to help with cross-committee collaboration. It'll be an easy way for you guys to hold discussions on things across the committees in between the council convenings. It'll be a way that the leadership team can share important information with you all, and you can use it as much or as little as you want. So let me go on and share my screen. Okay, so when I invite you guys, which will probably be either after this meeting tonight or tomorrow, then you'll have access to Slack. You should get an email from me that looks like this, and you can click join now. I'm going to come down here and click this because this link doesn't work for me since I'm using somebody else's. Okay, can you all see the sign in screen? Perfect. Okay, so now when you get into here, just make sure that you sign in with whatever email that you want to use. I'm going to be sending this email address to the email that I have on file for you. And then I sign in with Google. I use my Google for this. Mine's going to look slightly different than your all's because I am the workspace owner. But I just did want to go through the channels with you all. And some of you might have used this before. If you've used Discord before, it's very similar to Discord. Okay. So first, when you come in, you're actually going to come in on this welcome page here. And what I've done is I've included guidelines. And then if you click on the channel guide, it will take you to um, the channel guide and the guidelines that I created, a document that I created. So it tells you what each of the channels are for and links to them, and then also the guidelines that are also included on this welcome screen. So just to cover some of these, um, can you all the most important ones here. Do not post any sensitive information on this. So since this isn't necessarily KDE approved and KDE can't really handle any of our things with this, we're not going to post any actual files. We don't post any student information, passwords, anything like that. This is just a communication tool and link everything to the Google Drive. So we're still going to keep all of our files in the Google Members Drive, and you can put a link in if you want to, but outside of that, no sensitive information. Please remember that this is just a communication platform and there should be no expectation of a specific timeline on response from leadership, facilitators, or other members. So I don't want you guys to post something and expect that we've got 24 hours to respond to you or anything like that. It's just a communication tool. To create a new channel, you will need to message me, and then I can evaluate if it's necessary for us to have a new channel or if this is something that we can put in general chat, and I'll explain to you all when we get closer to that. I've included some general rules of thumb when joining a large community like this. We will have 80 plus people on this platform, and I am only one person that will be moderating the majority of it. So we are probably going to have some issues come up that we're just going to have to work through. But if you can follow some of these rules of thumb, I think it'll help keep everything more organized. And then, of course, I've included some non-negotiables that will get you banned from the platform. I don't think we're going to have any of these issues, but harassment or violent threats or language, you will just be immediately removed from the platform. And if you have any questions, or like I said, we're just getting into this program. So if you have any suggestions on ways to make things better or more organized, please let me know and I'll bring it to the leadership team so we can talk about it. Okay, so on the left side of here, you'll see a bunch of channels, and you won't have all of these channels. Everybody will have the hashtag channels here. Those are everybody channels, and then the locked ones are private channels. So all of you will go into the Accelerating Innovation private channel, and your administrators on that will be Sarah, Susan, Kathy, Jennifer, Andre, the leadership team for the Accelerating Innovation Committee. Announcements channel is where the leadership team can post announcements of anything that we feel is important for you to know. I'm going to skip general chat for now and come back to that in a minute. We've also created a channel for Portrait of a Learner update and information. On the announcements channel, the only people that can post are the leadership team and admin, but I can't do that with every channel. So Portrait of a Learner update and information does give you the option to post, but I'm requesting that you don't. We're going to leave that for Meredith to post information and updates. And then if you want to create some kind of thread about the Portrait of a Learner, we're going to do that in the general chat, which is where a lot of our discussions and things are going to happen for the council. Related information would be any kind of articles you find, links. Sometimes we get emails from people asking you all if you want to be a part of things. So this is where we're just going to post some of that information. If you want to look at it, you can. If you don't have to. And then useful links, we included the link to the member drive, contact information folder. We'll just put links in here that we think are useful for the council. So now going back to the general chat, this is where the majority of everyone is going to live and where the conversations are going to happen. What I'm requesting is that you create a thread. So if you look on here, I've already created some of these just to kind of talk to you about them. So if you create a topic, or if you want to talk about Portrait of a Learner, for example, you can put that in as a topic and then reply on that topic by creating a thread. So if I did Portrait of a Learner, and I post that, then I can go in and go to my three dots over here and click, nope, that's not right. How did I do that earlier? I'm sorry. Reply in thread. It's the little bubble. And so when you reply in thread, it will create a thread that will just be over Portrait of a Learner. So if you wanted to ask, what's going on with this or whatever, then people can now reply underneath that, and it's just going to help us keep things organized a little bit, make it a little bit easier so that it's not getting muddled with everybody's replies. So if we can keep the threads organized, then it will help us to make it easier for us to be able to search and to go through and make sure we're not double posting things, and it's easier for people to see things that they're interested in, if that makes sense. Again, with 80 plus people on a platform, it's going to be really hard to moderate that and keep those things under control. So all of this stuff is outlined at the top of each channel. It gives a description. This one, general conversations among the council, where discussion threads will be used. So any questions that you have on any of these, they should have um, at the top of the channel descriptions. Please do not post in this channel. This is for information only. If you want to start a discussion, please start a POL thread in the general chat channel. I think I've covered the majority of it. Again, moderating for 80 plus people, and be patient with us. And it's probably going to change as we work through things. I know we've talked about adding L3s into here too, so that we can have communication with the L3 community at some point. So we're trying this out for a little bit. We're going to see how it goes. If you all have suggestions on how to make things better, please let me know. Are there any questions, or does Susan, Sarah, Andre, Jennifer, do you all want to say anything?
I don't have any questions, Susan, but thank you for sharing with us today. I'm excited about kind of getting everything into one spot so where we can really collaborate more easily with each other. Questions? Anybody else?
So
Okay.
Susan, I'll add, do you want members to sign off or do anything about having read those guidelines? I know that you said there were some guidelines that you wanted us all to read. Do you think it may be helpful if there are any type of sign off, or I mean, is that an expectation for us to do?
Jennifer, I hadn't thought about it. That's not a bad idea. I was thinking that the guidelines were kind of going to be ever changing as we find like, oh, this is an issue. I need to add this in. Um, I will look into that and talk to the leadership team about that on Wednesday, but that might be something that we do ask for people to do just to make sure, to cover our bases that everybody's kind of read the guidelines because they are pretty important and there's not a lot of them, but they will help us keep things organized. So that's a great idea, and I'll bring it to the leadership team on Wednesday. Anybody else?
So I'll
Okay.
give credit to Andre for that good suggestion as well.
Okay, so I am going to, like I said, I'm going to I'm sending out the invitations in waves. So you guys will be the first group that gets the invitation for Slack. You're not technically active until you log in and go into Slack. This isn't going to cut out emails completely. We're still going to use email. So if you don't want to use the platform, you don't have to. It's just going to be an easier way for you to look up things when you're interested in it. So, all right. Thank you all so much for having me. And again, if you have any questions, please feel free to email me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to hear some cross committee updates next from Kathy.
Hello, everyone. How's everybody doing? Just a quick cross committee updates. I'm trying to figure out which one I'm going to start with. Well, with the Vibrant Learner, the last updates that we received is the committee will be meeting and revising their 6-month goals and start digging into where vibrant learning is happening across the state. So they're still focused on learning more about where vibrant learning is. And OVEC came in and shared their process for collecting where vibrant learning is happening. So they had a presentation made on that. The committee is also trying to answer the questions of where it's happening, how it's happening, and how they can measure the data as they look at what it looks like for vibrant learning. And then for the Bold New Futures, that committee is conducting research on the portrait of a learner and how it's being implemented across the state. And they're preparing for a presentation at the Kentucky Board of Education retreat in August. So Caleb will be presenting there. I'm not quite sure, and Meredith for sure will be there with them, but I'm not sure who else will be there. And they are have asked, there is something posted for those that wanted to give comments and feedback on what they thought about Portrait of a Learner. And Meredith had sent that out about 3 or 4 weeks ago for everyone to give their feedback if they wanted to. So, and I think there's still an opportunity. Susan Lyons will be able to tell you for sure if there's still an opportunity. And she'll be giving you more updates on what the Bold New Future is going to be doing when she talks with us. And as far as our committee is concerned, we met with the Bold New Futures group for their meeting in June and gave some feedback and some input into what we thought Portrait of a Learner might look like. And there was a really great discussion that went on in terms of where we want to go in the future. And they're going to share with they're going to share that information with us at some point or another. We're going to be meeting today, of course, to look at our prototypes and where they are. So we're going to start the day off with that. And we didn't have very many people present at our last meeting because of holidays and summer and all those sorts of things. So, but we appreciate everyone that has come on board and been supportive of the summertime projects that we're working on. I think that's pretty much all the updates that I have. Just everybody is still focused on their question. I was going to say BHAG, but we decided that we're going to call it just our outcomes, I think. So we're still focused on that. And once we start moving forward, the teams will be able to have more information to share. I think that's pretty much it.
All right. Thank you, Kathy. Always nice to kind of get a synopsis of what's really going on with the other committees, so we're able to do better work together. Susan Lyons, are you ready to talk about your subcommittee work and Portrait of a Learner?
Sure, great. So thank you to all of the Portrait of a Learner graduation requirements subcommittee members. Many of you completed the task that Meredith had sent out last month, which was to go out and interview someone within your stakeholder group and ask them questions about the Portrait of a Learner and implementation and the upcoming potential graduation requirements. So thank you for doing that. And then joining us last month at our June meeting, joint meeting with the Bold New Futures, to sort of share out your reflections on that task and provide that input. As Kathy mentioned, Meredith and Caleb and Tammy and the other facilitators as part of the Bold New Futures Committee has been working on collating all of the feedback and input that they've gotten from that task, including from our committee, and putting that into a slide deck to be shared, as Kathy said, at the August board retreat. And so the slide deck is almost ready. It will be ready to view tomorrow at the July 11th Bold New Futures Committee, and that committee has graciously extended the invite to our Portrait of a Learner graduation requirements subcommittee. So if you are interested in attending that to get a preview at how your feedback and the feedback of others was incorporated to be shared with the board in August, please do. I will follow up this meeting with a Zoom invitation link to our subcommittee members. So you're welcome to join that meeting. Given the short notice, I recognize that from 5 to 7 tomorrow night might be tight. So what we'll do is we'll make sure we do have a representative there who is able to attend and then can keep us updated on what they learned and how our feedback has been incorporated. We learned recently that we'll only have a 15-minute window at the August board retreat to share this input. So I know the team at Bold New Futures is working hard to stay true to the diversity of opinions that were shared as part of that task on gathering feedback on the graduation requirements with fidelity within such a short period of time. Jennifer, do you want to add anything else from the state's perspective on this?
Yes, thanks, Susan. I think that the participation of our subgroup here is important, and it's important for the board to have those varying perspectives. So having your input on that presentation from the Bold New Futures, I think, is important. And no, it's just a short turnaround, but tomorrow, if you can be part of the discussion, they really want us to be there. And if you're not able to be at that, then reviewing and having input on that presentation is very, very beneficial.
So if you're not able to be there, Jennifer, well, I guess we'll be able to share it when we can afterwards. We don't have it just yet, but after that meeting, we should have it. Okay, great. Awesome. Are there any questions on that before we move into our own full working groups? Okay, so this last month, each of our work streams was had the goal of meeting at least one time to move forward on our prototype development. We thought it would make sense for folks to just share out each of the 3 working groups on sort of where they are. Maybe they have made no progress because they weren't able to find a time to meet, and that's acceptable. But maybe you have, and I think it'll be valuable for us to hear from each of the groups to hear how did you approach this task? What came up for you? What was challenging? Where did you make progress? That kind of thing before we then break off into our individual working groups to continue to make that progress. So why don't we start with the state centralized group? That was the group that I facilitated along with Kathy. So I'm going to drop the Google Doc in the chat. This is the Google Doc that we're all working from to build out our prototypes. And so I'm wondering if we have a volunteer from our state centralized group that would be willing to speak to the nature of our conversation and how things went. Looking at you, Betty, Ernie, Eddie, Jerry, Cassie, not to call you out. If any of you recommend, or if any of you recall our conversation.
Oh, I recall it, but I thought I'd give everybody else a chance to speak on it. Cassie, what about you? You had some great ideas.
Yeah, my computer's acting kind of wonky, so I didn't see if it was pulled up, but I'll just hit the link so I can look at it. I think the big thing that we were at the beginning struggling with was how our role in finding assessments, like how could we balance what that would be without knowing exactly what the innovative learning experience is, because we don't want to assess them on if we don't know exactly like what experiences they've had. So a portion of our conversation started with the portrait of a learner and what assessment role that would be in. And as a group, we kind of felt like, you know, that was a separate component, that it could be a graduation component, but might be separate from like a true assessment, because it would be at the end of, you know, their graduation term. So it would be what we were hoping to align in the document, which you can see are some checkpoints along the way, so that we could get a true understanding of where kids were throughout their experiences. And if we wanted to use someone's going to have to help me with like the words, but it's basically like the assessments that were, I guess Kathy would know, what do they call them, or Betty. So when they go in and they like do the test, but it's more, instead of like standards based or like a standardized test, can't think of the word.
Were you thinking formative assessments or
Performance? Yeah, thank you,
Oh,
Betty.
okay.
Thank you, Kathy. So like the performance-based assessments, our hope was that could be a way of not only measuring and getting a true indication that weren't, you know, so standardized, but also it was preparing them for a portrait of a learner. So like these would be little opportunities for students to get used to having to present their ideas, also having a little autonomy and choice in how that they got to present them, but then really correlating it to the Common Core standards, because we do have to have a way of pushing this out to the whole state. So there has to be some way that it's universal, because if not, then everyone will measure against a different yardstick, and we wouldn't be able to use the data to really inform us. I guess that's kind of a quick synopsis. I'm sure I left something out, but I do feel like when we walked away, having those mile markers, if you will, along the way. As an elementary principal, something that was important to me was making sure that we didn't only assess in 5th grade, because they exit our building in 5th grade. So as a building principal, it would be hard for me to get those results back in October and not be able to make any changes to instruction. So I think we did put in there around 2nd grade, making sure that literacy, like getting to those, a reading level that we felt was appropriate to demonstrate reading proficiency. And then maybe in 3rd grade, looking at, more of the standards-based assessments with those performance-based opportunities in 3rd and in 5th. I just would hate for a kid to leave my building and not be able to make any change in instruction if it was done only in 5th grade. And then 8th, same thing for middle school, because they leave and you can't really make those changes that impact, directly impact those kids. Does anybody else want to jump in?
Well, I think you've done a good job. We did, I think, at the end. It took us a little while to get rolling. Once we got rolling, I think the conversation went rapidly and in many directions. I do think as Casey was saying, we did decide there has to be some form of statewide assessment. It couldn't just be district by district. That wouldn't work. And there did need performance assessment. And I think there was some discussion. I don't know if we came to a conclusion that there could be common units of study that are identified by the state that are part of instruction in the schools, and part of the assessment could be based upon that performance-based assessment. But that was nothing firm. That was just discussion at that point. But as she said, we felt that it was very difficult for us to determine a format or direction without understanding really what vibrant learning was going to be defined as. And it, but Casey did a great job.
Thank you, Betty and Cassie. Yeah, I think, thank you also, Betty, for acknowledging the challenge of sort of getting into the conversation. That's part of the reason we wanted to share out and sort of how we tackled this, because I think it can be hard to sort of imagine what would a new model of assessment or accountability look like, and where do we begin? And sort of it took us a while to figure out where to begin on that conversation. So if that's happening in your group, just know that's normal. That's part of the process to be thinking through the different components. And then of course, acknowledging the dependencies in this, right? So whatever we cook up here should be in reflection of what happens in vibrant learning, as you've both said. And so as the Cool Council gets deeper into its work, we're trying to figure out better ways to collaborate across committees too. So I think that's part of the SLAC effort that we just heard about, and other efforts that are happening and will be coming in the November meeting. All right, so thank you both, Betty and Cassie, for sharing. Kathy, did you want to add anything before we move on to the state supported group?
Well, looking at the state centralized, I've done a lot of work on just trying to figure out what other states are doing, or even other countries, because that was one of the things that we were looking at when we committed to that first report. And I found a lot of interesting information in terms of what things look like. So if you look on the page that has the blue one, and I think it's about the second page in state centralized, where it has information about what Singapore and Shanghai, what their systems look like. Most of them go back to what does teacher preparation look like? And that's something that's very important to looking at when you're developing assessments, as well as looking at accountability. And the lessons that they learn from it is that that's something that's really critical to developing assessments, is looking at what the teacher preparation is, and content, what is it focused on? What is the content for building knowledge for our students? And then on the next page, I wrote some comments based upon accountability, and that's the one that has kind of the lavender color, and the whole that too also talks about the commitment that is made when you're developing accountability standards. Guidelines, what do they look like? So the spending time on how much time is spent on learning, and keeping in mind that the work that society may not be, what works in one society may not be effective in another. And I don't think that that's anything that we need to be reminded of. We're not trying to model after someone else. We're just trying to find some of the best practices that are going on. And I think that that was it in terms of some of the other things that we looked at, or things that have been able to find since we had our meeting, and just wondered if anybody has any thoughts or feedbacks regarding that column that we filled in terms of our thoughts, or things, the information that we had, or questions that we had. Just hope that we'd have a chance to kind of look over them and see, does anyone have any comments or ideas that they would like to add to what we're looking at?
Thank you, Kathy. This won't be everyone's last time to weigh in on our prototypes. After they're developed, we'll spend time in August and beyond looking at them, discussing each other's work and with your suggesting preparing for our next report. So thank you, Kathy. Let us move then on to the state supported group. I don't know if one of the members is willing to share what sort of thinking's been done there, if any, yet.
So Susan, I'll just note for the group that the state supported group, we tried to meet collectively as a group and we were striking out. We could not find a collective time. So in lieu of meeting collectively, Sandy and I had the opportunity to meet individually with a few of our members. So Brandy, Amy, Cheryl, we did get to talk with individually. Darlene, unfortunately, we did not get to connect with her, but we look forward to doing that in our breakout session. So our members have been thinking individually right now. So they are looking forward to this discussion. I'm not sure if any wants to step out and share some of your thinking. I see Brandy may have come off mute there.
Yeah, I'm happy to. And I just put some notes in the chat. I didn't want to put those in our official document because I know we haven't talked about that as a small group team. But I did a lot of looking into New Hampshire and Canada and Colorado's systems and what those look like. And one of the things that was similar between all three was that they use kind of a mix of traditional systems. So some of the things we still have in place, but they also do that with some project-based as well. So they utilize both of those to determine how their accountability looks. I really appreciated that they did also look, there was one of them, and I don't remember which one off the top of my head, but they also somehow or another calculated common formatives in there. So I feel like that could be an approach with that criterion reference test that we could look further into as well.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing, Brandy. Great. And then unless anybody has anything else to add, we'll switch over to our local group. And Sarah, do you want to kick us off there?
Yes, sure. So kind of in the same boat with previous one, we were able, Andre, Larlyn, and Sandy and I were able to meet one afternoon in June and kind of just discuss a little bit about the process for looking at different locally controlled systems and divvy up some of that work. Some of our other members were just on vacation, and so we were looking forward to connecting with them today in our work time. But just taking a look at some of the local examples from our L3 districts with both Fleming County and Shelby County, and then also looking at some other locally designed systems, both the Canyon City, Colorado with their capstone graduation requirement and the systems in Finland, which we had discussed previously in our previous research as being really interesting on how locally controlled that system was, but the feasibility of whether or not that would translate to Kentucky because of the cultural differences between their country and ours and whether or not that would be possible. But looking at the L3 work and the Canyon City work in particular, there was a lot of things that we felt like could be replicable in a statewide system. So excited to kind of dig into that today. Andre, Sandy, Larlyn, I saw Larlyn earlier. Yes, anything y'all want to add?
Yeah, I might add like three broader considerations, actually. I think when I was listening just today to the different feedback or reporting here, I think really what might help us all at some point is also to take a common representation or a common entry point into thinking about these systems. Like, for example, graduation requirements, like we already have on the table, is a good one. I think the idea of operationalizing portrait of a learner and exhibitions and defenses of learning, for example, and how that might be useful from an assessment and accountability perspective. And then really saying, so under these different kinds of models, how does that play out? How does the same thing look essentially different across? And that the table gets at that to some degree, but I wonder whether, given how complex the assessment and accountability systems always are, whether that might make it helpful for us at some point to pick certain aspects that really have a large importance and weight, and then walk that across. Yeah, I agree with you on the time issue. You know, I think people are on vacation. For example, I know I'm working with Adam Hicks on a technical documentation that he is doing locally anyway around the exhibitions and defenses of learning, to sort of talk about both the methodology and the technical quality, and how he is scaling and expanding that. And I think from that we can learn a lot about those kinds of efforts in other districts, and you could then do some cross-checking. But he and I have not been able to connect in the last few weeks, and I know he's a very, you know, well-meaning and dedicated person, but I think it's just the time and/or vacation. But we'll definitely have that on our horizon and report that back out, and so we can add that to the other documentation that we have. And finally, I want to say to you all, this is actually a good reminder, maybe, to say, I don't know whether you remember this, but there was the NCSA conference recently, the 2023, where, you know, there was a lot of talk on different kinds of systems components. And I had offered that if anybody would like to obtain resources that are not particularly apparent, I think we can help as facilitators to learn more about additional systems or ways of thinking about particular problems in the assessment and accountability space. So, you know, you can access that on the NCSA website, National Conference on Student Assessment. And there's a portal there, and you can access the slides for some sessions, but some people haven't uploaded it. And so if you have like a list of things that you want to know more about, to learn more about particular pieces, we can sort of see, we can facilitate the information gathering and write to people we might know them directly, and so on and so forth. Yeah, thank you, Susan, for the link to the conference. So those are the three things that I wanted to add. Sandy, did you have anything else?
No, I think the two of you have covered it.
Okay.
Excellent. All right, and I appreciate, Andre, the push to be thinking about framing. At least I'll provide a little bit of context, and then we can go for the state centralized group. I think we were keeping the Portrait of a Learner, exhibitions of learner, graduation requirements in mind, and thinking about, well, what kind of state assessment system would be supportive of that kind of learning experience happening locally, given we're the state centralized group,
right?
What sort of centralized assessment and accountability system makes sense if, you know, in a world where those local innovations are happening broadly. So I'll just stop talking there.
Yeah.
And I think we're all eager to get with our teammates and make some progress on this. We'll have time to come back and share out on our progress and any reflections. In your groups, though, you might want to use this time to also find the next time that you'll connect. It would be great if you could find a time between now and our August meeting for your working group to meet and finish up this prototype, so that by the time we come back in August, we have sort of 3 fully thought out and fleshed out prototypes. They don't have to be the best system in the world. We don't have to solve all the problems, but at least to have something that we can work with and talk about and share about by August. So I'll put us into working groups now until 5:15. So maybe around 5:10, 5:05, start talking about your schedules in the coming month. And then we'll come back at 5:15 and share out before going on with the rest of the agenda. Yes, Kathy.
Is there anyone that's on today that hasn't had a chance to sign up with a working group? Because I think that there's still spaces, and there are some people that who have not been listed. So I didn't know how you were going to handle that.
That's right. So if you are here and you haven't signed up, I'd say join the one that most interests you at this moment and go for it. And we'll hope that we're relatively evenly distributed. Does that work for you, Kathy?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay. I'm just quickly creating these breakout rooms so they're clear. All right, and you should all be able to choose the room for you. All right, welcome back. So sorry to interrupt. I know there was good conversation happening in each of the rooms, but we wanted to save a little time to share out because the cross work stream sharing is really beneficial for all of our thinking. So are there any brave volunteers to speak on behalf? We'll start with the state supported group this time. Any brave volunteers from the state supported group to share out what you discussed? There were a lot of people in that room, and I know you were talking until the last minute, so it had to be good.
There we go. We talked about the Colorado, Canada, and the New Hampshire models. And we're also going to take a look at, and we were leaning towards the Colorado, but we're also going to take a look at the Texas model as well. And provide some feedback in regard to the Texas model.
Great. Excellent. Thank you, Amy, for sharing. And how about somebody from the locally controlled group?
I can share. We spent actually quite a bit of time really not talking as much about the work that had been done in the meantime, because honestly, not a lot had been done in the meantime, and I hadn't even been a part of the first meeting. So talking about basically this idea of what it means to be locally controlled and how that might look in our current state, and sort of a balance of what that of what it might mean to have people opt into local and not have everyone local, and some of the important things of what it means, like what kind of things are you measuring if you're really in a local system, and how much control should be, like, are we looking at things in terms of equity? Are we looking at what's important to the community? Like, how does this, or is it both? So we got into some bigger conversations more than just the specific models. So we've decided to have, moving forward, some people to continue to look at learning models, but then also a parallel stream to look at some of these other questions.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing. It's all really useful work for us to understand collectively. Yes, Andre.
Yeah, I want to add to this because Suzanne also had some two good points that I think we didn't put on the table. One was this idea of scalability and sustainability came up for us, especially when you take the state perspective, right? And you look across the local solution. So we were sort of saying, like, as we are looking at the different local contexts, you should put our heads on and say, like, so if this were a model that were to be replicated by other districts, or is maybe already being replicated, like, what does it take to scale and sustain that and add that as a column or entry in the table, for example? And then the other part, this, Suzanne, you said this, I just want to maybe add to this just a tiny bit, which is this idea of, in parallel, talking about these other ideas, but also maybe putting on paper some design options, right? So this difference between a rational analysis of these examples that we have and saying, like, okay, so now what would it look like if we have a model in which X, Y, and Z are more locally controlled, A, B, C are maybe a little bit more state supported, these components, and then just sort of like play that out and sort of mock up the design for that in a short and sweet way. And again, not either or, but in parallel, really, to like also looking at individual examples and doing a critical analysis of them. So, yeah. So.
Thank you, Andre and Suzanne. who from our state supported or state centralized group rather would like to share out on the nature of our discussion today? Jerry, do you want to take a stab at it since we called on Cassie earlier?
Well, we focused on, kind of grappled with the balance between standardized assessments, where they should occur, at what grade levels, and then looking also at the other types of assessments that should be a part of that, whether they're formative, performance-based, a portfolio approach, and looking at where they should all land along the way. We didn't come to any conclusions other than we felt like all of those were going to be a major part of an assessment system moving forward, that there had to be some points along the way where you actually measured progress of students through that standardized process. But then we also said things like, you know, for students when they become a senior, that should not be the first time that they actually do a demonstration of learning. That demonstration of learning should be taking place all along the way so that by the time they become a senior, that's second nature to them.
Thank you, Jerry. And I'll just add, we did spend some time also discussing the state's role in supporting early literacy as part of this system as well. So what does it look like? Is the state providing assessments that can be used locally to measure early reading comprehension and proficiency with benchmarks, or is it actually rolled into the formal accountability system in some way? So we did talk about that. And again, didn't land anywhere, but we have 2 meetings on the books to work out the knots of this. So just as a reminder to everybody, the goal by our August meeting is to have something where you have sort of the basic architecture of what this assessment and accountability system could look like in either your locally controlled, state supported, or state centralized environment. So what is the big idea? What are the key features? What are the key components of the system? So it doesn't have to be perfect, but we should have something that we can each hold up and share out about so that we can move forward as a committee. So thank you very much. And before we move on to Andre, Kathy, did you just want to make one note about Ernie, since she was part of our state supported group? You're on mute.
I'm sorry, I failed to mention that Ernie or Ernestine Weems is no longer going. She sent us a notice that she would not be able to participate on our committee, and with great regret, she has enjoyed working with us. However, she retired. Congratulations to Ernie on her retirement and what that feels like. And she said that part of the stipulations of her retirement is that she cannot be engaged in any education programs until after 1 year. So she can't even volunteer. So that was, but just want to wish her well and let her know that we appreciate all the work that she's done with us and for us for the last 9 months.
Thank you. Yes, she's been a contributor to our committee. I will pass it over to Andre, who will help us get ready for our Cool Council or preview what's coming at our next convening.
Yeah, so I'm going to frame this. What we're going to do is we're going to have a conversation really about this as a whole group for about 15-ish minutes or so. The framing of this is actually relatively simple. It's to sort of imagine looking ahead a few months from now and saying, okay, so we have another Cool Council convening. And there's a variety of ways in which we could increase our cross-committee understanding and working engagement and working with one another. And so the question is, what might be some meaningful ways in which you could see that playing out? And there's different, I'm going to give you a few examples and then I'm going to open up the floor. But so one example, for example, is saying, okay, so what is it that we want to learn, right? From other committees in terms of, and this could be through formal information sharing or through informal conversations. It could also be, how can we leverage us being together to work on a specific kind of problem or hard nut to crack. And I don't mean by that like, what's the next 6 months or 12 months goal going to be like, but are there particular, for example, design decisions or principles that we want to talk about and reconcile maybe in small groups? So for example, we've had in our annual report a list of initial design principles that we had derived. Would it be valuable, for example, to sit down across the committees in either smaller group or bigger group and talk about these and work on these? Or you're all working right now on some kind of a mock-up of a prototype for an assessment system. Is it worthwhile sharing that across the committees and seeing what the reactions are? So the big thing is meaningfulness and purpose. And I would say, I don't think we need sort of this fine line, right, of not necessarily over engineering it and then not having enough time to really breathe and go a bit with the flow, but also we just don't want to be like, okay, why don't we all sit together for 2 hours and just talk? So are there things that you want to learn about or ways in which you would like to engage with other committees in a way that is meaningful to your own learning, and do you think really can move this forward? And it can be conditional on, you can say things like, if I knew a little bit more about X, then I think we would be able to really sit together and work on Y. So is there something that comes to mind for the next Cool Council convening? This is a safe space, so you can just brainstorm, put it on the table, say what you'd like to have more.
I would like to know more about where our legislators are in this and what their thinking is. I know that the chair of the education, the Senate, I think it's the Senate committee, attended the last meeting, and I'd be curious to know, what are they open to? What's their thinking right now? And, where might something like we would propose land when it ends up in the House or the Senate?
Yeah. So the political policy guardrails essentially. Does that resonate with anybody else? Anybody like to add to that point maybe? Kathy says, I would like to have clear pictures for the upcoming meeting. Where is the KB and legislator? So I guess, Kathy, is that therefore the same as what Jerry was saying now? Or did you mean anything? You were just agreeing. Yeah, like that's something of interest to you as well. Okay. All right, anything else that you want to know about? Think about other committees, the Cool Council as a whole. Doesn't have to be just factual information, other ways in which you would like to have time with other committees, members of other committees.
I think that was the next thing I was going to say. What kind of interaction do you want with when we meet in November? We want it to be meaningful, and how do you want to interact, or what do you feel you need to share with the other committees or learn from them?
Betty, I think you just went off mute. That's always a sign for me that you want to say something.
It is, and I
Let's
kind
hear
of
it.
follow up with Kathy in that. I think it's important because we've talked about thinking about the assessment. A lot of that also depends on whether thinking about vibrant learning. So what is the definition of vibrant learning, and where are they going with that? We don't want to get far down the road and we plan something, they're going to propose something else. So if some significant reporting or interaction or something, I think it's critical to know what's the status of all three of the groups, because they're also interchangeable. You have to know where each one, what they're thinking about.
Yeah, it might be worthwhile sharing on that note, Betty, that I know internally in the leadership meetings, it has come up multiple times that there needs to be more of an alignment and integration of the three groups in the Cool Council. So more clarity on the Cool Council governance overall, and also on defining these sort of aspirational and pragmatic goals in a way that the different committees are really encouraged and like essentially almost like forced to work together so that this kind of, cross-committee understanding is developed. And so, yeah, so for example, and let's play this out reversely. Would you find it valuable to provide some kind of update to the other committees? So imagine there's like an hour and a half, 2 hour block, something like could even be an hour if you wanted to shorten it, something like that, where we say like, okay, every committee has, for starters, 15 minutes where they can sort of talk about what's currently going on. We'll have questions and then we'll split into working groups maybe and either follow up on specific topics or have a core guiding question that is common to everybody. Is that something that, or some other format? Doesn't have to be that.
It almost seems like there could be times on Thursday where doesn't work. 3 committees. I was going to put 2 committees working together and sharing back and forth, and those 2 committees only works if you have 4. So I'll take that one back. That one doesn't work. But I think there needs to be some significant time in working together, but I'm not sure now how that functions with 3. So I don't think just reporting out's enough, I guess is what I'm going to say. I think there has to be some connection between the 2, or maybe it's just 3. I don't know. I think there has to be some way that you're connecting so that we're not going in 3 different directions. You don't want to get down the road and we've gone in 3 different directions, especially if we've gone 3 different directions and the legislature is not going to support any of those directions.
Right.
So it is about time then to try to get something before we get too far down the line. We do have a due date for this, so it seems like this shouldn't be a muddy meeting.
Right. And so there's, for example, let me play with that just to give people an idea. So there's at least 2 variants of that I can see. One variant is in advance of the Cool Council meeting, through various either cross-committee meetings or surveys, some other forms of exchange. There is an agreement on what the Cool Council goal for the next few years until the end of the school year also is going to be. If you already had clarity on that, then you could spend the meeting on across committees working, for example, on how to make progress on that goal. And the alternative is you don't really come in with that and you just sort of give committees a way to identify priorities in like cross-committee working teams and then share that back out and sort of from that socially essentially derive the ambitious goals for the Cool Council. So that's 2 ways of playing with it, sort of like how do we get sort of a common purpose, and other ways. But I want to share that as an idea. I'm not saying all these ideas are great.
So I'm thinking of a situation where I was in a project that was similar to this. It was a national project with state teams and stuff. So there were times when we came together for what we called our learning sessions, which are what these I think are in-persons. And when we did, there was some times when they would have us together. I don't know, it's like by topic that were outside of committee. And then we were basically forced to not all be in the same groups, like that we had to have exact kind of a topic jigsaw, but we were sent to these other topics to learn about things and come back to our committees and bring what we learned about back to the committee. And I think there might be, if we know what, there might be a place for that in the agenda.
So I think that's right, Suzanne. I think that's the idea here. And I think one of the key questions that we're trying to learn from you all is what topics for that topic jigsaw would be useful.
And maybe it's even something, I'm trying to think of things that span across all of the, and I don't know, I'm just spitballing based on like some things in the chat. Like it might be helpful to have a topic that's around the student perspective and like a topic that's around, I don't know, like something that, right, like there could be topics like you said, did you say scalability or community? I didn't hear what you said.
I was saying early literacy because I know Kathy, that's always
right.
something that's on Kathy's mind. We had like non-traditional student populations and this idea that other groups may have other sort of like, and you could define the topics in a way that they're cross-cutting, right? So none of these issues, the way they're framed, yeah, very soon. None of these topics are essentially like of a kind that they could be owned by a particular committee, right? It's not
Right,
a policy
right.
on assessment or vibrant learning issue. It's an issue that cuts across. And so I think if you do that, then that has a lot of generative power. That's why I was thinking.
I think there's lots of them that you could, it just depends on the, maybe. And there may be ways to get input from that from the committees that, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, that's Kathy. I was thinking that similar thing. So Kathy was saying that what about getting these topics out in ahead of the time? This is the question that I put on the table earlier. Like, you know, what if we want to have a certain engagement? What should we do in advance, essentially, to be well prepared for doing that? So we have a leadership meeting once a month, and we could start that process of like essentially curating a list of core topics, prioritizing them. And then sort of saying with the idea that there would be like these working sessions or working groups at the Cool Council where people get together and they learn from one another about these, discuss on these topics, and both in terms of like what the topic is about, what the boundaries are, but also like how these topics are currently being worked and addressed, and how maybe setting just something simple like 1 or 2 goals on how maybe just one good idea, whatever. The CIE folks can add some of their magical ideas for how to make them better. So that might be a way to do that.
And I think like little things like that we sat at mixed group tables last time was helpful.
Yeah, that's a good point. So thinking about that in the setup of the meeting, yeah, that's a good point. I'll phrase the question slightly. Sorry, Susan, I guess you put that topic on the, are there any other topics? Does anybody want to mention another topic specifically that they think we should definitely always show, or is this idea of like maybe curating topics?
Andre, one other topic that I think has come up several times, and we have we kind of sidestepped it and worked around it, but I think it's still an elephant that's in the room, and that is how does this work from all 3 of the committees? How does this work intersect with the federal accountability requirements? And you know that comes up often, and it's not been addressed. It's not been talked about. We just kind of sidestep it. But I think that needs to be addressed in the big conversation.
Yeah, and so I would imagine, and there's at least 2 pieces to that, right? So there's the thing of saying, like, if we want to essentially empower local communities to embolden them to scale up the kind of work that they're doing in the current accountability system with the current requirements, like where are the tension points, where are the degrees of freedom that actually already exist, like how is that reconcilable? And then there's of course the future looking forward, like in the long term, if you wanted to be ambitious, and this is where the policy committee can help, like what are some, you know, changes or adjustments or modifications that in the long term would need to happen that, you know, technically a state like Kentucky could argue for in conversations with the Fed, you know. So, but I think they also like the idea, I think, you know, the idea, this is me speaking, the idea of being realistic also, of saying that there are, you know, these are the guardrails that we currently have, needs to happen somewhere, right? Like we have to have that conversation somewhere of saying like, where are the tension points? How does this apply? So that's a good point. I want to maybe phrase this question slightly different. Oh, Kathy wants to talk about teacher education training programs from their prep. Yeah. So post-secondary teacher education training programs. I want to phrase the question slightly differently. I want to give this a try and see, you know, for those of you who may be struggling a little bit with coming up with a topic, is there what would you like to come out of the meeting with in terms of either an understanding, think of this in terms of understanding, or a particular kind of, can even be like a feeling, right? Of feeling like empowered to do X, or knowledgeable about, I guess knowledgeable is about understanding about Y, or feeling like certain connections have been made. Others, if you think ahead a little bit, like, or clarity around like particular like deliverables for those of you for whom that may matter. Like, I want to have a clear, I want to really know what I need to do the month after this or this or this. Or I want to know, if you're more social, like I really want to come out and know how I can connect better with people. If you're more foundational person, maybe I really want to get more clarity on certain parameters. Different people are different. So is there something that comes to mind from that perspective? If you imagine it's now being November. Come on, people, don't be so shy. Help me, help in a facilitator out. This is like grad school. Go on. There's something that comes to mind about like what would be really helpful to you in terms of the what you like to come out of the meeting.
I feel like at the last meeting, there was a lot of struggle around coming to some clarity and some, I guess, decisions about the direction and the next steps. And it would be nice for me if, I don't mind the struggle, but I think it would be helpful if we had a better resolution earlier during the meeting, if that's possible. Sometimes you have to work through that when you're together. If I'm making any sense. I felt like that came up a whole lot of there being a lot of questions, and I know that can be productive, but to me as a person, sometimes that feels less productive.
Right.
Disconnected.
And Hannah, we see your point about the. Do you want to say anything on that, or I mean, it's pretty clear in some ways what you wrote. Do you want to add on that? Anything? And I'm going to go to you as a lead before we.
I don't have much more to add. I just think about all of the different stakeholders that take part in the process, especially I'm thinking more about my, I guess, subcommittee on the local level, even thinking more about the different pieces and people that will, will be part of that process, and how like understanding the different values and the different core values to each of them will be valuable in putting together a model. And so I think it would be nice to have an understanding of maybe some of those different core values. And one of the sessions that I was able to join at this conference, it was all about these generational differences. And I think you all might find that fascinating if you all do look at the document, because it talks about all these different times and those values that the people have. So all that to say is I'm just reiterating what I said in the chat, but I think that could be valuable in the process.
Yeah. And you know what, for example, what I think is great, one way of integrating this is we talked earlier about these sort of quote unquote special topics of interest, right? So let's make that a topic, and you could be facilitating that topic, right? Especially since you seem to have an interest and you've learned something in that session. So, that will be a great opportunity. In the interest of time, I do want to go to Azadeh. Azadeh, we have a few minutes, but I want to make sure I don't ignore what you said, because you said I'm completely lost, which means probably that either, let me see how either I can be clearer, or maybe can you just talk about what you're wrestling with for just a second, because you're sure you're not the only one.
No, it's just in general, and I shared it with Jennifer during our breakout. I'm just really trying to figure out what angle we're actually working on, because I thought I knew what we were doing until I listened to KDE present at the last education Congress meeting session, subcommittee meeting.
Okay.
I thought I knew what we were doing. And then that one, it just kind of sit like, wait.
Can you say that
So,
maybe what the difference was in if you can say it compactly? Don't want to cut you off, but we have limited time. So just
no, they were they announced the profile of a learner as the direction. And what I am looking at with accountability is, okay, who are we holding accountable? In what capacity are we trying to hold them accountable? And how does that actually mean anything to our kids in the grand scheme of things?
Okay.
Because I'm responsible for holding 17 facilities accountable to a checklist
Right.
of school things. But in the grand scheme of things, they're still going to get their funding. They're still going to keep doing whatever they want to do because they're allowed to by the district. And now we have this presentation from Board of Education and all the folks in their pretty little outfits in front of the subcommittee that's, we're going here. This is what it means. Thanks for supporting us. And we have legislators saying a 36 is a 36, and I don't care. We're going to have standardized tests that we're paying. And we're going to shell that money out. It doesn't matter if you can prove to us that there is all the children in our wonderful state actually are able to be productive members of society. Too bad we're paying Pearson.
Right. So I want to, I have to catch up just a tiny bit, but I would say what is great about this is, so I on the specific topic of this, I felt pretty good about the fact that you had a team of people who have a space where you can articulate that and advocate for that. But I think I hear that you're saying, like, I don't feel we are being listened to, or like this is not taken seriously enough because people are moving ahead. So I think in general that is a challenge, right? Like for all of us who have a particular topic of interest that we're really passionate about and that we think the future system should hold. So we could, and so I could personally see this connected in different ways to what we could do in the Cool Council meeting. And do you have a particular, maybe let me ask you this, do you have a particular quick recommendation or something for something that you would like? For example, you could sort of put it in as as a focal topic, right? And just bring people across the committees like together and other people on that specific topic. What are there? And if we hear from people who are like legislators, as Jerry had asked about earlier, you and the people who share that similar concerns could speak to that in that kind of conversation. If we write another report, for example, or you can advocate for that in that context. So is there anything in particular that comes to mind for the meeting? And then I know we have to move on. It's nothing personal, just time-wise. Is there something that comes to mind?
No, not at all. I'm just,
okay.
My brain does not work in the same system.
Okay.
We do not. And so I just am still trying to figure out who I understand significantly better since Jennifer explained it, but I just work in a completely different system that
right.
You're going to make all these recommendations and things, but schools are still going to get their money.
Right.
And they're still going to be, we're still going to do whatever we want to do.
Yeah, and I will say I don't have the golden, not that I have to have the golden idea anyway, but I don't know how to build that bridge coherently and consistently. And maybe, there's other people on this call. So I encourage you, if you hear Azadeh and her struggles and her frustration, so maybe there's a way that it comes to mind where you can support her in maybe advocating for that and it continuing to do that or more differently and help us to build that bridge more tightly. So let me leave it at that because unfortunately we're out of time. for today. We only had 20 minutes. So Susan, I feel like you have gotten some ideas for, and I would say this. I would encourage you all, once you've slept on this. I don't think they've planned like a formal like post-meeting survey, although that just came to me. Maybe might be good to put some of the questions that we had in a quick survey. But at least if we don't do this, at least if you have another idea, another framing, please just write it in an email. Write it to Kathy and Sarah for sure. If you can remember to CC Susan and me on that, that'd be great. Then we're already in the loop. And if not, at least Sarah and Kathy. And we will definitely take that into consideration and make sure that we try to do our best in making sure that, you know, your ideas are incorporated. Thank you.
Okay, I know we've got a lot going on this afternoon and a lot more to discuss still. I think the last kind of question before we wrap up here in about 5 minutes, is there anything that we want other committees to know about our work? Come on, y'all talk all the time about wanting to be cross committee and know what everybody else is doing. So you got to give me something to give to them.
I think it would be valuable to work collaboratively with the Vibrant Students Learning Committee about aligning, you know, their learning, what that learning, those experiences look like, and also trying to have some sort of alignment with what our accountability could look like, because their experiences, they may not be thinking about how those experiences could be captured in a way to think about the outcomes, or they might totally be thinking about that, but maybe kind of having that in the back of their mind as they're thinking about their experiences.
Okay, thank you, Hannah. Anybody else? Okay. Well, I know Kathy already talked about congratulations to Ernie on her retirement, even though we hate that she's not going to be joining us anymore. And then Kathy also mentioned Meredith Brewer's email that went out to the entire council. That survey is due for the call to action for KBE by July 17th. So if you haven't finished filling that out, I know they would really appreciate the data coming from all of us as well. And then otherwise, we will see you all in August. Some of you we will see earlier as we're getting going on our working streams. But just as Susan said earlier, the goal is to have something down in that document, just so we have a jumping off point to continue our research into moving forward in our goal. So, all right, thank you guys. It was a great discussion.
One quick note, just want to say goodbye to Sandy. This is his last subcommittee or the last committee meeting. He'll be working through July, but he won't be at our August meeting. So thank you, Sandy, for all your support of this committee.
Thanks everyone for the chance to work with you all. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Sandy. I'm gonna miss you.
Miss you too.